Hi guys, it's Danny from Orchid Nature. So today we're gonna answer a question sent by Brett, and he's asking if we should fertilize sick orchids. Okay, so I'll tell you my opinion and some cases in which you can fertilize and some cases where it's best not to fertilize. So it depends on the sick orchid. Usually sick orchids tend to go without roots. So if you have an orchid that doesn't really have roots or it just has very sick roots, I would suggest not fertilizing it in any way, partially because the orchid is not able to absorb too much moisture and too much salts, and the fragile roots can actually get burned by the excess salts. So if you have an orchid that really doesn't have too many good roots, I would suggest not fertilize it. But when the orchid starts to pull out new root tips, it's time to start fertilizing actually. But I would suggest using a quarter of the amount recommended by the dosage, maybe once every 2 weeks. This is just to play it safe and not actually burn any more roots. So when you see the root tips growing, you can start to mildly fertilize your orchid. Now, I would suggest using a fertilizer that has higher nitrogen, because this actually promotes vegetative growth, which means foliage and roots and so on. It doesn't necessarily promote flower spike production and so on. So, okay, this is the case where you can start to fertilize. If you have an orchid that is pretty much dehydrated, but it does have a good root system, I would suggest you let it get adjusted to a new environment if you just brought it home, or to a new potting medium and so on. And when you see growing root tips, then you can start fertilizing it. Maybe not go with with a quarter of the amount recommended. You can increase it to half the amount recommended. So fertilizing half the amount every 2 weeks, I think, will do good for the orchid. Again, what you want to use is the higher nitrogen one, or at least a balanced fertilizer. I wouldn't go with a high phosphorus fertilizer for orchids like Phalaenopsis and Oncidiums and stuff like that. Usually Dendrobium orchids are the ones that you shouldn't necessarily fertilize with high nitrogen. But again, if you're dealing with a very sick orchid that is just producing a root system, you really don't care too much about flower spikes and flowers at this point. You want the orchid to have all its energy focused on leaves and root production. So okay, these are the cases in which I think you can fertilize an orchid. If it doesn't really have roots, or the roots are very burned and fragile, I would suggest not fertilizing it, especially if you're using tap water, which already contains some dissolved salts in it. So okay, thank you for sending in the question. Hope this helped. This is just what I think and how I do things with my sick orchids. The total time in which an orchid goes from sick to being healthy varies depending on your environment, the season, and the state of the orchid actually. So if you have any other questions, just pop them in a comment and I'll try to answer for you. And also, if you want to get in touch with us and share your orchid stories with us, visit orchidnature.com. So thank you for joining, and don't forget to subscribe if you like what you see. I'll see you next time. Bye!